Hello and welcome to the second week of your Ashoka System Change course. We concluded the last session by identifying several root causes to the big problem, formulating systems that are behind each root cause, and selecting one system that you decided to focus on. This week we will look deeper into the system that you have selected and will articulate the dysfunctions of the system, or what we want to change in it. Based on these findings, we will formulate the targeted system change. In other words, we need to first understand how the system is working right now and how exactly we want it to work in the future. Let's start by refreshing our memory about the definition of a system. Last week we discussed that a system should consist of minimum three things: elements, interconnections between them, and some kind of a purpose or a function. For us to elaborate a bit more on this definition of a system and to make it visual, we will use the tool called 5R Framework, which has been developed by USAID and slightly adjusted by us. The 5R Framework calls the first three elements of a system that we just mentioned roles, relationships, and results. It also suggests that there are two more R's. Any system has resources that feed it, and rules, both formal and informal, that define its behavior or the process of transforming resources into results. Together, these 5 R's capture the basic dynamics of a system. They also point at different leverage points to improve or change the system. You can read more about this framework in the articles Local Systems and the 5R Framework by USAID. We will provide the link in the materials. And we will go through an example of a system visualization together in a second. But before we do this, let us give you a bird's-eye perspective of the whole 5R exercise. We will do this exercise in two phases. Phase 1 is about defining the status quo of the system, and Phase 2 is about defining the target state of a system. In step 1, we start by clearly articulating the title of the system that we will work on, and its boundaries and relative size. In step 2, we discuss which results the current identified system produces right now. In step 3, we identify other R's of the current system, the resources, roles, relationships, and rules needed to explain the results outlined before. Once we have more clarity of what our system looks like today, or its status quo, we can proceed to phase 2, defining the target state of the system. This will require us to articulate the desired improvements in the system's results and build a hypothesis which elements, or R's, of the system need to change in order to achieve the desired results. Rarely is there only one option of what can be changed in order to improve results. Your goal is to generate and analyze several options and choose one to focus on. Note that usually no change in one R comes alone. It will usually bring about changes in the other R's as well. In particular, a change in someone's role will typically bring about a change in the rules and vice versa. We can easily see this on the example of fishermen becoming conservationists, as their mindset changed about the economic value that conservation has for them. It is also a reminder of how influential mindset changes are and that a frame change approach is very powerful. Let's have a look at how a system can be analyzed using 5R tool. We will look at the system of electricity production and provision in Germany that has been the center of attention of our German fellow Ursula Sladek quickly upon the Chernobyl nuclear power plant catastrophe. The resources that have been going to the system back then included coal, gas, and uranium. The financial investments used to come from the corporate side. What the system used to produce was electricity based on the fossil fuel and nuclear power, which significantly affected the environment, led to high prices for consumers and their dependence on few big producers. The system as such did not offer many opportunities for innovation. If we look inside the system, one can say that there have been three major interconnected roles. Energy producer role was placed by a few big centralized companies which were selling energy to energy distributors, often affiliated with them. The energy distributors were then selling and delivering energy to the consumers. Consumers had no chance to choose the source of the energy they buy. Key changes that have been achieved throughout years of work of multiple stakeholders include the fact that sun and wind have now also become viable resources for electricity production. Renewable resources today constitute 1/3 of Germany's overall electricity sources and lower the ecological footprint of the system. This change has been enabled by a major change in the roles and relationships within the system. Energy consumers gained the right to play the role of energy producers, choose the source for the electricity they consume, and invest in the sources of their choice. This dynamics has unlocked competition in the system and led to lower prices and more innovation in the system. Have a look at how our Rs have changed in the system. We have added sun, wind, and private investments into resources. To the rule sections, we have added the fact that private individuals are now allowed to feed energy into the grid, and citizens can choose the type of energy they consume. In the results section, we have added that ecological footprint has been improved, prices have become lower due to competition, reliability has increased, and more opportunities opened for innovation. You can also see the changed relationship between energy consumers and energy distributors. In summary, if we put the essence of Ursula's system change into one sentence, we would arrive at something like the following. In the German electricity production and provision system, citizens become energy providers. Role change. By owning the means of electricity production and the power grid. Relationship change. You might also remember the fishing industry example from week 1 by Ashoka fellow Al Harris at Blue Ventures. Their targeted system change is, in small-scale fishing communities, fishermen become conservationists, role change, and regulate themselves, rule change. Lastly, an example you all know is Mohammed Yunus, who set up Grameen Bank to show that in the private banking sector, social capital can be used as a collateral for loans. Resources change. Let's have a more thorough look at how to do this exercise and use a familiar example for every step of it. We start by defining the title or the name of the system. Are we talking about the education system or the health system? Can we be more specific? Can we also define the geographical scope? It is very important as it will give us some boundaries. Ideally, the system should be defined as narrowly as possible and as broad as necessary. Let's come back to the example of our UK fellow Karen Matheson from the last week's video. We have slightly specified the system, and now it sounds like the part-time labor market in the UK, which has a better focal point than just the labor market in the UK or the labor market in general. Remember, perspective is everything. Choose a slightly different title for the system and a lot can change. If you struggle with naming the system, here is a small tip. You can think back at the root cause of the social problem you choose to focus on and think about who are the 3-4 actors with most impact in the root cause. Now think about which system includes them all. Step number 2. Let's list the results that the system produces right now. What comes out of a system? We should mention both positive and negative results. Results can include specific outcomes, for example, share of cured patients in the healthcare system or share of students who complete higher education. Results can also include economic value and its distribution, or new knowledge. Make sure you capture diverse results the system is producing. You can also mention trends, increasing or decreasing, or patterns in the result over time. Some tips from us. Be generous. No system produces only negative results. Otherwise, it would have already ceased to exist. And second, focus on the most important results. A good first step is to identify the one outcome that the team wants to improve and 2 others that they do not want to make worse in the process. Coming back to our example, we can say that the part-time labor market system in the UK produces the following results. About 20% of the overall employed people in the UK are employed part-time. Majority of part-time employees are employed in low-skilled, low-paid vacancies. Candidates often end up either work-class or overqualified and underpaid. Companies lose diversity, but save on HR administration. Now we proceed to resources. And we will ask ourselves, what goes into the system to produce the formulated results? Are there needed resources that are missing or insufficient? Resources can include money, but also knowledge, time of stakeholders, physical infrastructure, and others. Make sure that resources you list are diverse. Some other questions to consider include, Are there trends increasing or decreasing or patterns in resource inflows? What are the sources of these resources? Are they reliable and secure? Here are the resources that we see flowing into the system of the part-time labor market in the UK. Paid work opportunities, a number of potential candidates, which we probably can count in millions, different skills, knowledge, and time of candidates, expertise of HR staff, business leaders, and recruiters. And now, let's move on to the roles. Please remember that when describing roles, you are not doing a stakeholder mapping exercise. That means you don't need to write specific names of organizations or people, but rather identify different roles that are played by stakeholders in a system. It is common that one role can be played by multiple stakeholders. In our example, key roles in the part-time labor market are, of course, employers and part-time candidates, as well as recruiters, industry associations, the government, and business schools or universities. This will make a lot more sense in a moment when we look at their relationships. Now let's explore the relationships. They can, for example, include transactions, flow of information, power dynamics, influencing, decision-making power, various types of cooperation, and other types of relationships. In Karen's example, employers currently provide the part-time candidates with only limited number of part-time opportunities and at low quality. Recruiters connect with both, but they deprioritize part-time candidates in their recruitment support and advice to employers. Now, the remaining three roles all influence the behavior of employers. Industry associations set standards for competitiveness, which have an impact on employers. The government regulates the kind of work contracts that employers can offer. And the business schools and universities train the HR staff and business leaders that make decisions about hiring. Thereby, they also have an influence on the decisions employers make about part-time candidates. We will focus our attention on two key roles and the relationship between them: the employers, suppliers of work opportunities, and part-time candidates who are searching for work opportunities. You can see that the relationship between them right now is rather weak, as employers today are quite cautious about part-time opportunities and are mostly providing them in the low-skilled, low-paid jobs. We will now explore rules in our system. They can, for example, include laws, company policies, traditions, people's preferences, prejudices, cultural norms, and other formal and informal rules. In the part-time labor market, various rules, especially informal rules such as mindsets, influence the behavior of the system. Part-time employment is perceived to reduce the competitive advantage for business and is mostly considered for low-skilled jobs. There are also fears that people who are allowed to work flexibly, such as at home, might work less. Overall, it has a stigma of being connected to a lower socioeconomic status, and so simply doesn't seem attractive to many of the actors in the system. We now have completed phase 1 of the 5R exercise, which was all about describing the status quo of the system. Have another look at it with fresh eyes. Does it capture most important elements and dynamics? Invite your team and stakeholders to comment on your model of the system. Keep in mind that the point is not to describe the system in all imaginable detail and complexity. The point is to outline the most relevant aspects given the team's particular situation and interests. Remember that all models are wrong and some models are useful. You don't have to describe the R's in the order we did. Think about it as an iterative process. Move from one category to the next and make adjustments in categories that you already worked on until you arrive at the version that you like. When doing the status quo visualization, make sure that there is a logical, clear connection between the resources, rules, roles, and relationships and the results. It's time to move on to phase 2, that is about formulating the target state of the system. When describing the target state of the system, imagine that your social venture has not been founded yet. Forget what you are doing on a daily basis and focus only on the social system that you want to change. Remember that your intended system change, once established, should not depend on you or your organization. Put another way, Your venture, products, and initiatives should not be mentioned anywhere. This exercise is not supposed to explain your model, it's supposed to describe your intended system change. And one final note. Teams often want to establish new roles, like new intermediaries that coordinate other roles. This can be a perfectly legitimate system change, but it's often not ideal, because it usually requires setting up a new organization that does direct service at high scale and therefore runs into limits of impact rather quickly. It's better to change the existing roles and relationships in such a way that the coordinating role is not needed in the first place, because one of the existing roles took it on. In fact, we find that many fellow system changes are based on those who are originally perceived as being the problem, and they ultimately become the solution. Think Al Harris, who turns fishermen into conservationists. We are now in step 4 of our 5R framework process. We will be stating which current results of the system need to be improved. You can do so by adding, changing, or removing the formulations of the results in the status quo. So how could our UK fellow Karen change the definition of the results that the existing system of the UK part-time labour market produces? She could say that she envisions a system in which there is a higher share of people employed part-time overall, that among part-time employees there is a higher share of high-skilled people in quality jobs, and there are overall sufficient opportunities for highly skilled part-time candidates, that companies gain diversity, and at the same time companies spend more on HR administration but gain profits overall. In the final 5th step of the 5R framework, our fellow Karen would need to emphasize changes in roles, relationships, and rules. Employers as a role become aware that flexible job brings competitive advantage and strengthen their offer to candidates. The mindset or rules of the system change and the attitude towards part-time job becomes more favorable. Once you have explored potential changes in different elements of the system in order for it to achieve better results, let's clearly articulate your options for targeted system change. The final part of this exercise will be about formulating in just one sentence the essence of the key system change you identified in the 5R framework. It may seem strange to reduce it to just one sentence, but as you already saw in our earlier examples of system changes in the energy, fishing, and banking systems, it's perfectly possible. Not only that, by focusing on the essence, we bring clarity to our North Star and complete a key piece in our strategy process. For the rest of the process, you can always come back to this one sentence and evaluate your decisions based on whether they lead to this targeted system change. It's the simple yet highly systemic piece of the process that links your ambitious big problem with a more tangible and achievable system change. When we formulate these targeted system change sentences, they roughly follow the same format. Let's have a look. This scheme can help you produce succinct statements. In the system X, and you name your system, there is a need to add, change, or get rid of one of the R's in the system: resources, roles, relationships, or rules. And then you specify what kind of change you mean exactly. And then you state what kind of improved results this would lead to. Let's together read Karen's targeted system change statement. In the UK part-time labour market, there is a need to change a rule and relationship. Employers need to see high-quality, flexible work candidates as a competitive advantage. This leads to more part-time work opportunities in total and to higher quality work for those who would otherwise be overqualified and underpaid. You can also find a bunch of other examples in the worksheets. Now, at this point, it is very likely that you might end up with several options of a targeted system change statement. It would mean that you are not pre-programmed for one specific solution and are openly exploring options. Your goal would be to analyze and compare several options of a targeted system change so that you can make an informed choice of a targeted system change that is both most effective for achieving the desired change in results and most feasible for you. Here are a few questions you can ask yourself when comparing potential system changes and making this choice. Give your answers on the scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the maximum. How beneficial is this targeted system change in terms of improved health and outcomes of the system? How easy is it to achieve this system change in terms of time and effort needed and risks involved? To what extent can you use the unique strengths and assets of your venture to promote this goal? Does this goal align with your values and motivation? Is there anybody else doing work on this particular targeted system change? Have a look at the potential system change with the highest scores. This is likely to be your first candidate. If you don't feel comfortable with this choice, use the answers to the questions as the foundation for your choice, but disregard the total grades. Remember that there are many options of how elements of the system could be improved. The point is not to do them all at the same time and design a perfect system though. The point is to identify a feasible yet highly impactful system change that would give you the improved results that the team wants to achieve. Good luck with filling out the worksheets with 5R framework and your targeted system change statement. Don't forget to use the checklist on the worksheet to make sure you haven't missed anything important. Some final remarks from our side. Remember to add as many data as you can along the way. We strongly recommend that you do this exercise together with your team and other stakeholders. As we have stated earlier, system change can rarely be achieved by the efforts of one organization. This is why it is so important that you engage your future allies and take into consideration their perspectives as early in the process as possible. Keep it simple. The goal is to gain clarity on the system change goal and not to describe a system in full detail. In your final document, there probably shouldn't be more than 4 resources, 5 roles, 7 relationships, 5 rules, and 4 results. Make sure you don't mention yourself. This venture, its products, and its initiatives should not appear on the systems map. This exercise is not supposed to explain a business or operating model, but the system change that the team wants to achieve. You have finished the second week of your system change course. In our next session, we will explore the journey towards the targeted system change you selected. We hope you have enjoyed this week's session, and we will see you for an online call on Wednesday, February 27th from 3 to 4 p.m. Central European Time. Make sure you come to the call with all the doubts and questions you have collected this week.